and away we go. We're moving! They were the machines that made Britain great. Fast, revolutionary, and sometimes downright dangerous. These are the stories of our engineering masterpieces that shook the world and drive the way we live today. If any one decade can claim to have the greatest impact on human history, it might just be this one. It's the 1940s, and the world was at war.
It was a war we had tried hard to avoid. And when it happened, it was very different from the war we'd expected. Hitler's mighty technological war machines swept through Europe.
Britain was determined to stand firm. As Churchill declared, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender."
The threat of invasion sparked an unprecedented period of innovation, ingenuity, and improvisation, producing an amazing variety of new machines, unsung heroes of World War II, and the roots of modern Britain.
Life would never be quite the same again, because war really was the mother of invention.
May 1940. The greatest retreat in history begins. Following a crushing defeat by Germany in Europe, 330,000 Allied troops are rescued from Dunkirk.
For 9 days, hundreds of ships and boats raced between Dunkirk and the English coast. There were dark days ahead, and Britain was ill prepared for war.
The mighty German army was now encamped just 46 miles from Britain.
From July 1940, the skies over the English Channel were filled with thousands of German aircraft. We faced the greatest threat of invasion since 1066. The Battle of Britain had begun.
Angels 1-6, Willie Victor 3-4.
Scramble 222 and 504. Intercept Chelsea Bill.
Vastly outnumbered, our pilot's lifeline was a new experimental machine that shared its technology with the latest household gadget.
This is London calling.
The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us.
At the time, few people knew what a radio wave actually was. Some even believed it could have potential as a lethal weapon.
In the 1930s, the Air Ministry, in all seriousness, offered a £1,000 reward to anyone who could demonstrate a radio wave death ray that could kill a sheep at 100 yards.
The turning point came when they approached top British physicist Robert Watson-Watt. They asked him if he could generate a beam of radio waves so powerful it could destroy an enemy aircraft.
Watson-Watt calculated the required energy levels as wildly beyond existing technologies. He also pointed out that the metal fuselage would protect the crew from the radio waves. But he did have another very useful suggestion.
He calculated that even a normal low-power radio wave like those used by the BBC's broadcasts would bounce back off a metal aircraft. So instead of radio destruction, he suggested radio detection. Just 2 weeks later, in a field near Daventry, Watson-Watt made his first attempt to demonstrate his invention: radar. Using modern equipment, here's my version of that historic day. In here we have a radio transmitter and a detector, and over here we have a display screen. Now, back then, the equipment would have been much bigger, but the principle is exactly the same. First, the transmitter emits short pulses of radio waves. So I'm beaming radio waves across 90 degrees in that direction. According to this screen, there's nothing out there that's moving. With a clear line of sight, radar can see much further than the naked eye. Well, yes, I'm seeing a blue blip at the top of the screen. My radio wave pulses are reflecting off a moving object. It's just going from left to right, Based on the time it takes for the echo from each pulse to return to my detector, the radar system can calculate the range and speed of the object.
Right, a range of 301 meters, radial velocity, or speed, 4.46 miles an hour. And it represents the only moving thing that's out there, which is a BSA M20.
With his first prototype, Watson Watt detected a bomber 8 miles away, 4 minutes before it reached his position.
He had a working early warning system, and it went on to be one of the most important British machines ever created.
In 1936, a chain of radar stations began to appear around the British coastline, codename Chain Home. Each had 4 350-foot tall steel masts to send out the radio pulses. The echoes were detected by antennae on 4 shorter receiver masts. Inside, operators kept a vigil day and night. They were capable of detecting incoming aircraft up to 120 miles away. By 1940, 21 radar stations were linked to command centres buried deep underground out of reach of German bombs, where the Battle of Britain would be won or lost. This one, at RAF Uxbridge in northwest London, oversaw 11 Group, the squadrons at the sharp end of the battle.
A room I've seen in so many war films. Just incredible that the sense of history, the smell of history is just incredibly powerful.
Radar operators telephoned enemy sightings through to this control room. On a huge map, markers track the movement of enemy units approaching Britain.
Hostile 10, 40 plus aircraft.
A system devised by the forward-thinking head of Fighter Command, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding.
So Chris, how much time did the system and radar buy us?
Remember, at the shortest point of the channel, it's only 20 miles across. German bomber formation would cruise at about 180, so you can work it out, it didn't take too long to get across.
From detection over France to our airfields could be as little as 20 minutes.
It takes a Spitfire squadron around about 13 minutes to get to 20,000 feet. So you can see how radar gave us time to get the aircraft airborne and up into position.
Angels 1-6, Willie Victor 3-4.
From July 1940, thousands of enemy aircraft converged on Britain. When incoming aircraft were detected, Allied squadrons were scrambled. Then, again using radar, guided to intercept the enemy.
Scramble 222 and 504. Intercept Chelsea Bill.
Enemy engaged.
The RAF was outnumbered by the Luftwaffe 2-1. But thanks to the great British invention of radar, they could be scrambled exactly when needed and flew far more successful sorties than the enemy. In nearly 4 months of fighting, 1,733 German aircraft were taken down, but at a cost.
Yes, more than 900 RAF aircraft were shot down.
The aircraft were replaceable, but trained pilots weren't. So victory in the Battle of Britain would also depend on another great British machine. Every day, dozens of pilots ended up in the sea.
And if you were lucky, you'd scramble out of the cockpit, deploy your parachute, and end up bobbing up and down in the English Channel, kept alive only by your trusty Mae West. But you wouldn't survive out there for long.
It was a race against time to find and rescue the downed pilots in the 29,000 square miles of the Channel before they died from exposure. There were no life rafts, no distress beacons, and no helicopters. But by 1940, what we did have was this. A fantastic high-speed, long-range, all-weather rescue boat built specifically for the RAF, the HSL, or High-Speed Launch. Its story begins a decade earlier with a friendship between two great British petrolheads, racing boat builder Hubert Scott Payne and aircraftman T.E. Shaw, Lawrence of Arabia.
In 1931, stationed with the RAF near Plymouth, Lawrence witnessed a seaplane crash.
He was in one of the first boats to reach the wreckage and dived in to rescue survivors. Of the 12-man crew, only 3 survived.
Lawrence was convinced that more lives could have been saved if the RAF had faster rescue boats. So he teamed up with Scott Payne to develop new designs based on the latest racing technology.
For hundreds of years, seagoing ships and boats had rounded displacement holes like this model. They were stable and streamlined and allowed the boat to push through the water. But as speed increases, it creates a larger and larger bow wave that will eventually limit a boat's top speed, known as hull speed.
Scott Payne knew a way round this ancient law. Rather than a curved hull, he used a flat bottom with sharp edges called hard chines. Like his racing boats, given enough power, this design lifts the hull up onto the surface of the water, overcoming the drag that a bow wave creates. It's called planing and allows boats to far exceed their hull speed. In this boat, Seaplane Tender 206, Lawrence, after months of testing, achieved 29 knots. Still not fast enough. In 1936, although Lawrence sadly didn't live to see it, Scott Payne finally unveiled their high-speed planing masterpiece.
And here she is, the 100 class high-speed launch, or HSL.
A 64-foot sea rescue revolution.
So here we are in the middle of the boat in this beautifully restored wheelhouse. Phil, we're underway, aren't we?
We're underway.
Today I'm heading out with HSL expert Phil Claburn to discover exactly how these boats were used on rescue missions.
These were very, sort of fast, get out quick, and pick up the pilots and bring them straight back. There wasn't much facility to operate on them or do injuries on board.
For these ambulances of the sea, speed really was a matter of life or death. A 64-foot boat's theoretical hull speed limit is 11 knots. So let's just see how much faster Scott Payne's HSL can go.
At the moment we're just on tick-over speed, or displacement speed, where the boat is sitting in the water. If I start to give a few revs, like so, and then maybe a few more revs, the idea is to get on the plane, which is about 13 knots with the 100 class, so a few more revs.
13, 14 knots, and we're starting to lift up out of the water. Steady on, Phil.
Power! Yes!
And some more.
The HSLs originally had 3 massive petrol engines, together producing 1,500 horsepower. Her modern diesels produce over 1,200, plenty of grunt to get us on the plane.
You can feel the whole vessel lift a little bit there, as now we are definitely on the plane.
With her no-compromise combination of power and hull design, the HSL was capable of 39 knots, 45 miles an hour. Job done, boys! The hard chines also bring great control. These boats could head out in almost any weather.
Urgent message, pilot down. 24-6 west, 45-3 north. Let's go, chaps!
By June 1940, 22 HSLs were positioned along the coastline. The world's fastest sea rescue service had been created, just in time for the Battle of Britain.
Ah, got him! 11 o'clock!
Another pilot saved. During the war, more than 11,000 were rescued by RAF launches around the world.
There you are, Cummings. There's your tea. Oh, all right, I'll leave it here for you.
Drink it, mind.
Thanks to this great British machine, we didn't run out of pilots, and after 3 months of intense aerial fighting, the Battle of Britain was won. In 1940, the realities of war took over the everyday lives of the British population. Millions of civilians, mostly children, were evacuated to the country. those that remained were getting used to blackout blinds and air raid drills. On September the 7th, 1940, the German Luftwaffe began the most devastating series of attacks British cities had ever endured. London faced 57 consecutive nights of relentless bombing.
As fireman Jerry Knight said, send all the bloody pumps you got, the whole bloody world's on fire.
The Blitz had begun.
London's firemen, including thousands of raw recruits, faced the fight of their lives.
The Blitz, like the war itself, was a crisis for which Britain was barely prepared.
In 1938, Britain's largest city, London, had just 2,500 firemen. Not enough to cope with an all-out bombing raid. So the government established the AFS, the Auxiliary Fire Service.
With true British wartime spirit, over 30,000 men and women volunteered. But there was a dire shortage of firefighting kit. Classic fire engines like this beautiful 1938 Dennis simply couldn't be produced fast enough. It was time to improvise, and production focused on the one piece of a fire engine you couldn't do without, the pump. This is a 1941 Jowett.
Fundamentally, this machine consists of an 8-horsepower car engine in here, driving a pump here. You attach your supply hose here and your delivery hose here, and you could expect to squirt out roughly 250 gallons per minute. Simple and easy to use, or so they say.
Barry Lambeth from West Sussex Fire Service is going to give me some hands-on training as an AFS volunteer. My first job is to stop Barry falling over.
That's it, with your left arm on my shoulder.
Okay, like that.
That's it.
So why my arm on your shoulder, Barry?
Your arm on my shoulder is basically to stop me being pushed back. When the force comes through the branch, you will see how much force there is pushing back.
And this is known as the branch, yeah?
This is the branch. This is the branch.
These trailer pumps didn't have as much pumping power as the old-style fire engines, but they could be produced much faster and in vast numbers. And they were easier to use, although training was still intensive.
The auxiliary firemen at the beginning of the war did 60 hours before they were actually allowed to go out to fires.
Wonder how many hours before I get a go. By the start of the Blitz, the AFS were equipped with more than 20,000 pumps.
But what remained in short supply was a means of getting the pumps to the fires. In the middle of the night, in a blackout, and often with bombs still falling all around you. Taxi!
South of the river this time of night, Governor? You must be joking.
Come on, mate.
Oh, all right then, you little so-and-so, jump in. All right, chaps, let's be having you.
Yes, about 2,000 London taxis were drafted into the fire service during the Blitz. Taxis like this classic Austin 12.
The Austin Heavy 12 was purpose-built to negotiate London's maze of streets, with plenty of grunt from the 12-horsepower engine. Just hook up your pump, and there's plenty of room inside for a team of 5 firemen and their gear.
Okay, even a very roomy cab was a bit tight, but it did have one very special attribute that made it perfect for the fire service.
Like all London black cab drivers since 1865, all licensed cabbies had to pass the knowledge and learn every road and landmark within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross. So of all people, they would know the fastest route to a fire, even if a road was blocked by a bomb crater or a collapsed building. London's firefighting taxis are a wonderful example of British ingenuity and improvisation.
During the Blitz, they helped save thousands of lives. A great stopgap that kept the fire service moving.
Come on, gentlemen.
Well, just about.
As hard as you can, gentlemen.
Until a new purpose-built fire truck started rolling off the production lines.
Did someone say fire?
It may not look it, but this is the forerunner of the Great British Fire Engine as we know it today.
Made by Austin, like the Taxi, this is a K2 truck chassis, powered by a 6-cylinder, 28 horsepower overhead valve engine. Unlike the Taxi, this engine had more than adequate pulling power to tow a pump and a full fire crew around London. Right, into the back of the K2 we go. And these marvellous bench seats. There we are, look at that. Plenty of room for fire equipment. And plenty of room for firemen. And unlike the Taxi, a shrapnel-proof roof.
Keeping your crew protected inside was a major improvement, just as they are today. And crucially, Austin was able to churn out large numbers of these trucks quickly, thanks to the simple idea of taking an existing general-purpose chassis and giving 5,000 of them firefighting bodywork.
Of course, with these machines, everything is heavy duty, everything is massive and built to last. And it's that familiar sound of the whine of the gearbox. There it is, the cogs turning, you can hear it all. Very, very distinctive, with the rustle of the 6-cylinder engine. And a rather ambitious speedo clocked up to 80. Absolutely brilliant.
In September 1940, all hell broke loose as German bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives and incendiary bombs on British cities. This was Britain's fire brigade's finest hour and a turning point. The foundations for the highly modern service we see today were set in the flames of the Blitz.
During the Blitz, 2 million British homes were destroyed, 90,000 civilians were injured, and 60,000 killed. A great many more homes and lives would have been lost had it not been for the grimy-faced angels of the fire services and their great British machines.
Finally, in May 1941, when Hitler invaded Russia, the bombing stopped. The people of Britain were granted a reprieve and a chance to regroup. But U-boats were still blocking Atlantic supply lines and rationing was in full force. So while British men enlisted for the fight back, it was up to the 80,000 new recruits of the Women's Land Army to feed the nation. They would have to learn fast and work as effectively as possible, or Britain would starve. Thankfully, the land girls had a new best friend. A revolutionary farming machine that would prove easy to use and very efficient. The David Brown VAC 1.
In the 1940s, these machines pioneered a new era for the tractor, which had always been very much a slow, lumbering workhorse. And the key to its success was David Brown's expertise with gears.
The David Brown Company had been building precision gears since 1898 for everything from tanks to battleships. Now they wanted to start building their own machine, and they'd found an opportunity. No one, it seems, had ever asked the farmers what they wanted from a tractor. But David Brown's team did ask, and this is what they heard.
More speed, please.
And that's where that gearbox expertise came in.
So here we have a standard car gearbox. Inside here we got 4 forward gears and 1 reverse. Now, as this is a tractor, we have a 3-speed low ratio box, good for high torque pulling power in the field. But this is the difference. Once you get out onto the road, this shorter lever here, you can shift from low to high and double your speed.
A brilliant innovation, and gearboxes like this with 2 ratio ranges are found in most modern tractors and 4x4s. It gave the VAC 1 a top speed of 20 miles an hour, over double the speed of its rivals, saving the land girls precious time getting to the fields before they even started work.
So we are now ploughing, folks. And what I'm doing is I'm keeping the 2 offside wheels in the original furrow that I ploughed before.
No broken nails so far. This is ploughing made easy. If I can handle it, so could the land girls.
Great bit of fantastic old, purely solidly steel machinery, shifting God's earth. Magnificent.
Then at the end of a row, another great feature of this machine. I can lock up the rear brakes for a kind of tractor handbrake turn, and before you know it, I'm ploughing the next row.
I have to say, it's a fantastic feeling, shifting all this earth. Really good, earthy feeling.
The all-new VAC-1 helped the land girls grow the food that fed the nation. And soon, equipped with more new machines, we were ready to fight back. The first target was industrial Germany. Production of Hitler's high-tech war machine had to be slowed down. We had built some great long-range bombers, but they couldn't get the job done on their own.
It's so ruddy dark down there, I can't see a damn thing. Blasted clouds.
By day, our bombers were shot out of the sky. By night, they couldn't see what they were bombing.
In the early 40s, less than half of our bombs were falling in the right place. We had to get more accurate. So, once again, we turned to radar.
Radar technology was developing fast, and it was shrinking. This tiny device had 100 times the power of the first chain-home radar transmitters. It's called a Cavity Magnetron.
This is a very cleverly designed valve which produced radio waves with a much shorter wavelength than any device before. Now radar could detect much smaller objects with something considerably smaller than a chain-home radar station.
In fact, so small you could fit it into an aircraft, a development without which modern aviation and shipping would grind to a halt. By 1943, Lancaster bombers were fitted with on-board radar units called H2S. Inside, the operators saw an image of the ground ahead for up to 30 miles. Now, they could see in the dark.
So here we are in our aircraft, right in the middle of this top screen. Our target is the southern tip of this landmass here. You can just see it being lit up there. And this straight line here represents our direction of flight, which, as you can see, is right over the target. Now, by twisting these two dials under here, you can determine your altitude and your range, given by this circle here. And with all of this information, you can calculate exactly when to drop your bombs.
By late 1943, guided by this great British invention, Allied bombers were targeting the heart of Germany, Berlin.
In winter, Berlin was often hidden beneath cloud cover. No longer a problem for British and American bomber crews. Thanks to H2S radar, they had a precise picture of their targets on the ground, day and night, whatever the weather.
Bombs away! In the 1940s, while our bomber crews did their best to cripple German industry, back home our own factories were preparing for war on land. All sorts of civilian companies suddenly found themselves in the arms business. With some surprising successes, like British car builder Daimler, makers of this beautiful 1938 DB-17.
Daimler built luxury cars for the well-to-do and the upper classes, including the royal family.
With luxury features like the pre-selector gearbox, a predecessor of the modern automatic gearbox. Choose your gear, press pedal to metal, it changes gear for you.
Yes, so this is one of the smoothest pre-selector changes I've ever used. Really good. But as the 30s came to an end, the demand for luxury had somewhat fallen off.
In 1938, Daimler was the perhaps rather unlikely recipient of a government contract to build a totally new type of vehicle.
It had to be fast, it had to be stealthy, it had to be armoured, but it also had to have superb go-anywhere off-road capability. And it had to be built from scratch in just 1 year. Impossible? And this is it, the Daimler Scout car, affectionately known as the Dingo. Is there a problem?
I think we can let this chap through, Pearson. Back up.
The Dingo has a reputation as one of the greatest reconnaissance vehicles ever built. It saw action from 1939 well into the 50s. Its modern descendants still patrol the world today. But its finest hour came in the aftermath of D-Day. Armoured vehicle expert John Pearson has joined me to explain more.
It wasn't intended to fight, it was intended to sneak up, look, get the information back so that the advancing army would know where the enemy were.
Old-style scouts on horseback were no longer able to keep up with a modern, mobile, mechanised enemy. But the Dingo could. With war approaching fast, Daimler had rushed their design from drawing board to working prototype in less than 12 months. And yet, the Dingo achieved an amazing 60 miles an hour, on and off-road, making light work of the odd bump and gleefully wading through rivers. This fantastic performance was partly achieved with a massive 55 horsepower engine adapted from one of Daimler's luxury cars. But it also came down to some very pragmatic design decisions.
As an armoured car, the Dingo has to trade protecting its crew against speed and agility. The weight is kept down to roughly 3 tons, there's no turret, no roof, and a tactical approach to armour.
Most of the armour is no more than 10mm thick steel plate, just about enough to protect against machine gun bullets.
Where we're most vulnerable to attack is here at the front, which has much thicker 30mm armour, which in theory is enough to stop a light anti-tank round. But I don't think I want to be sitting in here when they tried that out.
In June 1944, the Dingo faced its greatest test in the aftermath of D-Day. Following the bloody carnage of the landings, the Allied invasion force found itself penned in against the Normandy coastline. It was up to the reconnaissance corps, the eyes and ears of the invasion force, to find a way through. On the 31st of July, a Dingo driven by Trooper G.B. Bland left on a risky recce mission.
What can you see, Pearson?
The diminutive Dingo was great for sneaking along narrow tracks and hiding in cover. But as Trooper Bland headed into hostile territory, there was a very real risk of contact with the enemy. So as well as stealth, he needed firepower too.
The Dingo was equipped with a Bren light machine gun like this one, a British version of a Czech original.
The British Bren gun was perfect for the recce corps because it was light, simple to use and proved very reliable. And it could unleash 120 rounds a minute with deadly accuracy. A skirmish with infantry was one thing, but the lightly armoured Dingo had to pick its fights.
Do I see panzers before me, Pearson? Yes, definitely panzers, Pearson. Time to employ the secret weapon.
Select first, engage, throw it in reverse.
Pre-select third.
And this time 60 miles an hour backwards.
And we're going as fast backwards as we were forwards. Absolutely fantastic.
All 5 gears in reverse. It's thanks to the same pre-selector gearbox as the luxury DB17 I was driving earlier. Which means, as the troops said at the time, you can get out of trouble faster than you got into it. In his hunt for a route out of Normandy, Trooper Bland was now deep behind enemy lines.
Hello, sir. Yes, enemy infantry spotted at crossroads 1 mile west-northwest of our position, sir.
He had found an intact and lightly guarded bridge.
Secure that bridge, Bland.
Very good, sir. On our way, sir. Moving out, Pearson.
Trooper Bland and his Dingo secured the bridge, the Allies' escape path from Normandy. The Dingo, a brilliantly improvised machine, rushed into production on the eve of war, was the mechanical hero of the hour. And the march to Berlin could begin.
Well done, men. God save the king.
The end was in sight. With grit, valor, ingenuity and inventiveness, the Allies had achieved the impossible. We'd turned the tide of war. But there was one great invention of the 1940s that took much longer to develop. It played only a minor role in the war, but it went on to change the world like no other machine of the decade. Even though it was based on an idea that at first must have sounded completely crazy.
An engine that pushed you along using its own exhaust fumes. And it was made possible in no small measure by the humble knife and fork.
Surely only a fool could imagine such a thing replacing the mighty piston engine.
So when a young RAF test pilot told the British government that beauties like this 1800 horsepower Bristol Hercules had reached the end of the line and that development money should be poured into his gas turbine engine, the government said in that way that governments so often do, no.
That test pilot was Frank Whittle. In 1930, aged just 23, he patented the gas turbine or jet engine. It was designed to produce incredibly high-pressure exhaust with just one main moving part, the rotor. But to generate sufficient exhaust thrust to power an aircraft, the rotor had to spin at 16,000 revs per minute, enduring temperatures of 500 degrees Celsius. No chance with traditional materials. But Whittle believed he had just the material for the job, a newly developed relative of Stay-Bright cutlery steel.
In 1939, just in time, the next generation of this came along, Rex 78, which could handle temperatures 100 degrees higher than any stainless steel around.
Most top government advisors remained unconvinced, but Whittle did have supporters, including Hugh Dowding of Fighter Command, who was quite literally bowled over by Whittle's progress.
During a test run, unable to be heard over the racket, Whittle pointed out the jet nozzle to Dowding as if to say, "That's the business end." Oblivious, Dowding walked straight into the blast and was instantly hurled across the floor. Point made, I think.
In May 1941, Whittle's perseverance was finally rewarded as Britain's first jet aircraft took to the air, the Gloster Pioneer, which 3 years later evolved into the first jet fighter.
And this is it, the wonderful Gloster Meteor, a 500-mile-an-hour jet fighter. Its two Rolls-Royce jet engines were developed from Whittle's original designs and each produced over 3,500 pounds of thrust.
Unfortunately, no two-seater models were built. So pilots couldn't actually be trained to fly this revolutionary aircraft.
All the pilot got was this, pilot's notes. The trimming controls are spongy in operation, and accurate trimming therefore demands great patience. Just what you want to know when you're hurtling towards the ground at over 400 miles an hour.
As they got to grips with their Meteors, these brave pilots pioneered the jet age. A whole new world of extreme speeds and G-forces, in which everything happens so much faster. And that includes things going wrong. So the Meteor was used to develop another great British machine, the Ejector Seat. A challenge that the Martin Baker Company had been working on for some time.
The challenge was to eject a man and his seat, combined weight of say 200 kilograms, clear of the cockpit in a target time of under 4 seconds. The simplest solution was to fire the chair vertically through the canopy like a giant bullet from a gun. Bang!
Unfortunately, shooting 200 kilograms fast enough required an explosive force that would subject the pilot to 300 times gravity, 300 G. In experiments, Martin Baker calculated the human spine could only handle a maximum of 21 G. So they developed an ingenious solution that fired the ejector seat more gradually.
Pull these two handles here, and the first charge here is triggered, bang, and this gives you your initial push. The blast gases pass down here to these other two charges, bang, bang, which gets you up to full speed.
And reduces the maximum G-force to 21 G.
But even with this gradual push, your spine could still be compressed by up to 1.5 inches.
This is 70-year-old ex-RAF pilot Stan Hodgkins, who's been flying Meteors since 1988.
So here we are, Stan, at the Meteor. Back in the day, apart from speed, what were the main differences that pilots would have experienced going from props to jets?
Oh, this is a beautiful ride. Taxiing is like a Rolls Royce. It's got wonderful soft undercarriage, and the engines are remote from the cockpit, and you can hardly hear them.
There you go, Stan.
Today, Stan's taking to the skies in this stunning 1952 night fighting Meteor to give me my own private jet flypast. In August 1944, Meteors finally saw action against one of Hitler's super weapons, the robotic V-1 flying bomb. The new high-speed jet fighters were the only British aircraft fast enough to catch up with the V-1, destroying 14 in the final stages of the war.
In the 1940s, it must have looked totally insane. Where's the propeller?
A fantastic machine, and this was just the beginning. Thanks to the Gloster Meteor and Whittle's jet engines, Britain would soon lead the world into the jet age. More than any other invention of the 1940s, this machine changed the way we live today. On the 8th of May 1945, Britain celebrated victory in Europe. There was dancing in the streets. The process of rebuilding Britain and rebuilding lives began. There was a spirit of fun and adventure in the air. And even Britain's engineers were getting in the mood. In 1947, David Brown, with his tractors selling well, saw an advert in the Times for a struggling high-class motor business.
Agnes, love, get me the bank manager on the phone, will you, dear? Great.
And so he decided, in his own words, to have a bit of fun. And splashed out £20,000 to buy the company.
So what was the name of the clapped-out car manufacturer? It was none other than Aston Martin.
This was the prototype sports car he inherited and gave his initials to, the David Brown, or DB1. Unfortunately, it wasn't much cop. It was underpowered, overpriced, and, at least in its standard four-seater form, too slow to win any races.
Agnes, love.
So DB called the bank manager again. Ah, now this looks a bit more like it. The DB2.
Oh yeah, it's lusty. Lusty, lusty, lusty lady, this one, woof. But the DB2's performance didn't come cheap. In fact, to achieve it, David Brown had to spend a lot more money.
Brown had heard that the legendary W.O. Bentley had recently designed a new engine for a company called Lagonda. Bentley's design produced more power without the need for a bigger engine, thanks to its double overhead camshafts.
Here we have a camshaft. Now, as this spins, these cams here open and close the engine valves, allowing the fuel-air mixture in and the exhaust gases out. In W.O. Bentley's Lagonda engine, there were two camshafts. One under here, opening and closing the inlet valves, allowing the fuel-air mixture in, and one under here, opening and closing the exhaust valves, allowing the exhaust gases out. With this setup, the engine can breathe more freely, which boosts power and performance.
David Brown was so impressed with the Lagonda engine, he bought the whole company. Together with an improved chassis and, of course, a top-notch gearbox, the engine gave Brown what he wanted most. A ferocious top speed approaching 120 miles an hour. Very fast for 1949.
And it pulls nicely from about 1300 RPM, which is good. And of course, this is a racing car, so we got lots of rattles and tattles around the place, because it is built really for one thing, and that's going that way quickly. You know, this is built for business.
Straight line speed was exactly what Brown needed to relaunch his new company on the world stage. At the world's greatest race, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. At the third attempt in 1951, Aston Martin DB2s took first, second and third in class. And a few years later, the DBR1 took overall honours.
Aston Martin was no longer a struggling high-class motor company, but a world-leading marque.
And the transformation was complete when it inspired one of the great writers of the generation. Ian Fleming made the Aston Martin the ultimate aspirational car for every go-getting, action-loving gentleman.
Ejector seat, you're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
Great, ambitious engineering and an amazing success story. Like so many of the great machines of the 1940s, built from a stubborn refusal to give up. Thanks to the spirit of those times, as well as some of the world's best sports cars, we soon had a modern fire service, air-sea rescue, mechanized farming, and aircraft that could travel around the world using radar to know exactly where they're going. And more often than not, delivering passengers rather than bombs. Because the 1940s was the mother, not just of invention, but of the modern world.